Welcome into the All Aussie Rules Football Podcast. Today we're going to be looking at the only two games played in opening round this year and a whole bunch more. So stick around and enjoy. Welcome on in, everybody, to the All Aussie Rules Podcast. This is episode 11 of 2025, and AFL football is finally here for 2025. Starting this weekend, not in the way that we expected, but we're getting half of what we expected. So we're going to be running through all your opening round stuff here today. Plan for the episode pretty much is we'll start with a little rant about opening round because, hey, everyone else is, why not me too? So we'll start with that. Then we'll do our match previews of the two games that are going ahead. And then we'll finish off with our power rankings heading into the start of the season. Just an FYI, these are not my predictions on how the season's going to go. It's basically how they ended last season, with a few changes based on where they're at the minute. So that's the plan for today. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Every single one helps. Whether you're watching this on Spotify, watching/listening on Spotify or YouTube or Apple Podcasts, hit that follow button, subscribe button, whatever it is. Every subscription helps. It's all free, so make sure you do that. Like the video if you're on YouTube. Make sure you leave a comment. Let me know what you think of opening round. I'll be interested to see all of your thoughts because mine are going to be pretty obvious in the next few minutes. So all of the, admin out of the way, we're going to jump straight into it. If you haven't already heard, which I'm sure everybody has by now, the first game was meant to be tonight if you're watching this when it releases, Thursday. But two games from this weekend have been cancelled. Not cancelled, postponed. They will be happening at some stage. Hasn't been officially announced yet, but it's pretty clear that the Brisbane Geelong one will be round 3. I don't think there's any doubt about that. They'll just move it to when they both had the bye, which is the correct call. The other one is a little bit more interesting because there's no easy fix for the Gold Coast Essendon game. My thoughts, I don't know. There's no perfect situation here. You're either going to have to move some games around and try and squeeze them in, move some games around for bye rounds the second time round when every team has their byes in that 5-6 week stretch, to move some games around to try and get a couple teams on the same one is an option. People are floating the after round 24 option before finals. I don't think the AFL would want that. I think that'd be their absolute last resort. Either way, there is no perfect situation here. Hopefully, it comes to a spot where, neither team is too disadvantaged. Obviously, playing this weekend just wasn't an option for them. Moving to Melbourne I don't think was really an option either, because then you're taking the Gold Coast players away from their family, away from their homes, when there's potential bad storms. You also, would their minds be on the game? I know external factors can't come into it, but at the same time, it is what it is. I think the right decision got made in the end to postpone those two games, and where we go from there, will it work out fine? For the Geelong-Brisbane teams, makes no difference to them now. Obviously, they start a week later, but it just fits perfectly into their schedule. There's no doubt about it. They were going to be having a bye in round 3. Is it 3 or 4? Whatever round it is. Anyway, so this just means that now they don't have that bye, but they start a week later. So that's no issue for them. Whereas the other two teams, it could end up being a bit of a disadvantage for one of them, or both of them. We'll wait and see. But hopefully the AFL is working on something that will be mutually agreeable. So yeah, that pretty much sums that up. We'll now jump into my little rant about opening round. I pretty much started this podcast 12 months ago, almost to the day. About a week ago, it was 12 months. It's today, or at time of recording, it's a year since I posted my first video on YouTube, though. But yeah, if you weren't here last year, I did give it a little rant, not a big rant, because I'm not someone that gets into the politics too much. I'm more here for the football, where we follow the stats, we follow the teams, we follow players, but we don't get drawn into the outside world too much, all the politics of football. But in this case, I think it's fair. I mean, like this, obviously, opening round this year, the big issue, I guess, the cancelled games or postponed games, is nobody's fault. I'm not taking that into account at all. I thought it was silly last year. I think it's even worse this year. Just in the fact that it makes no sense. You're starting 4 matches a week early for no reason other than, hey, we want the Queensland and New South Wales share. But they've got rugby this week anyway, so that makes no difference. And if you want to highlight those two stays, that's fair enough. I don't mind it. Start round 1 with those 4 teams all hosting games in their home grounds. I'm fine with that, but let every other team play as well. It just makes no sense to start teams a week early. It used to annoy me back 15 years ago when they used to start the season with split round, but at least that was kind of at least something where, yeah, some teams might have played a week earlier than others, but it ended up after the first round, every team's on a level playing field. Whereas this way, it's a weird system that I think is unnecessary. It doesn't gain anything. I think you could quite easily play 9 games of football, still spotlighting the Queensland and New South Wales games. Quite easy to have a game in Brisbane Thursday night, game in Sydney Friday night, just like was going to be this year. Move the Gold Coast Essendon game to 4:40 on or 4:10 or somewhere around there, 4:00 start on the Saturday afternoon, straight into the GWS Collingwood game, and then you just sprinkle the other ones around them, not clashing. So you can quite easily have 3 games on Sunday, which only leaves you needing 2 more games. You start one at 1:10 on Saturday. It's finished before the Gold Coast game. And if you want one more, it probably will clash slightly with the the GWS game, sorry. But if you start one like a 7 p.m. WA time start over in WA, I mean, that's going to be 9 p.m. or whatever start in the eastern states, and the game's most of the way done. So I think that's the way they should be doing it. I mean, they've got their reasons. I just think that's stupid. Pretty much sums it up. All right, rant over, opening round. Let's jump into it and what we can expect to see this weekend. So this is what we've got, opening round 2025. Down to 2 games. Friday night, 7:40, Sydney v Hawthorn, which should be an absolute cracker. I mean, can you have a match of the round when there's only 2? Deciding which one of these 2 is also kind of difficult, but Sydney Hawthorn should be a ripper to start the round. And then to finish the round, we go, no football Saturday, so that's a bit, how you doing as well? It doesn't make sense to me the way they scheduled them this year either. Having only one on Saturday and one on Sunday is pretty silly to me. Anyway, GWS Collingwood Sunday afternoon. A bit of a rivalry has grown between those 2 teams as well, so that should be interesting. That means the buys are obviously Adelaide, Carlton, Fremantle, Melbourne, North Melbourne, Port Adelaide, West Coast, Western Bulldogs, Richmond and St Kilda, and the 2 matches that were postponed. Brisbane v Geelong, and Gold Coast v the Bombers. So that's a little rundown of what's happening this week. It's not what we expected to see, but Cyclone, you can't control the weather. So that is what it is now. The AFL's made the right decision, I think, in the most part. And now it's, 2 games highlighted in New South Wales this weekend. They'll both be must-watch football. To be honest, the Brisbane-Geelong one would have been as well, and Gold Coast-Essendon could well be a great game as well. So overall, they were 4 good games that I was looking forward to. It's put a little bit of a dampener on the excitement of this week, which obviously, opening round, football's back. I was ready to go, but we still get a couple games, so it will whet our appetite a little bit to get us over through till round 1, and every team officially kicks their season off. If we jump into the first game, we're going Sydney Hawthorn, Friday, 7th March, 7:40 p.m. So if you're watching this when the video goes out, the game is tomorrow night. Teams obviously have not been announced yet. Hawthorn are pretty fit overall. They don't really have many injuries. I think we're expecting to see them bring in both of their 2 new backmen. Battle and Barras will both play, I would imagine. They look pretty fit. They should be almost at full strength almost to start the season, which would be a huge positive for them. Obviously, they finished last season really strongly. Meanwhile, Sydney is not quite as fit. Obviously, Errol Gordon is the big one. He's out. He got hurt his ankle in that pre-season game. So he is one, obviously, almost first picked player that won't be playing in this one. Outside of that, they're pretty fit. They've got a couple other players that won't be playing. There are a few injuries in the Sydney world. But overall, they're still going to have a really strong lineup. You still got your Isaac Heaney, your Chad Warner. They've made some changes in their forward line a little bit. Mainly with putting McCartan up forward in the pre-season. I would imagine that's going to continue after he played all right in the second practice game. So Marty kicked 6 in the first one against GWS, and then McCartan looked good in the second one. He kicked 3 or 4. So outside of Errol Gordon, McDonald's out for 5 weeks, so that's kind of why McCartan's going forward. Callum Mills is going to miss 4 weeks as well, so he's obviously he's the captain of the club. So he's out. Robbie Fox is out for 6 weeks. There's a couple players with tests, but I'd imagine they will play in Brodie Grundy and Papley. Most of the rest of the injuries are either fringe or VFL kind of level players at the minute. So overall, on the most part, they should be pretty fit, pretty decent team still, I would imagine. We'll see from them. But as I said, not perfectly fit. It won't be their best lineup they have this year, I wouldn't imagine. And for Hawthorn, it's no one serious is out, really. Kaushadir won't be playing. He's to be called, so we don't know exactly how long he's out for. But the rest are tests that Mitch Lewis also not playing, as well. But overall, that's how the 2 teams look health-wise heading into the round. I don't think... we'll find out the teams tomorrow night, or tonight when you watch this, if you're watching it when it comes out. But I wouldn't imagine there'll be too many surprises with either team. They both were really good teams last year. And, yes, we know Hawthorn will definitely be bringing in 2 key backmen, into their lineup from their team last year. But outside of that, I don't think there'll be too many surprises. And same for Sydney. They're going to probably put McCartan forward. And, outside of that, I don't think there's anything too exciting. If we look at the history of this matchup over the last couple of years, they only met once last year, which was at the MCG. It was in round 7, which, if you think back to round 7 last year, I know it's a while ago now, but these two teams were in completely different spots. Sydney had only lost one game up to that point. They were 5-1 going into this game, and that one loss was to Richmond at the MCG. So there was a little bit of a question mark about their ability at the MCG at this point. But other than that, they were like up in the top 3 or 4 teams on the ladder. Everything was going great. Meanwhile, in Hawthorn land, they'd only got their first win of the season, I think, the week before. I think they went 0-5 to start the season, and then they won round 6, which was against North Melbourne, who were the other team that hadn't had a win at that point. So not many people were expecting much from Hawthorn at this point of the year, and in all honesty, they didn't show much in this game, in this matchup in round 7 last year. They ended up losing it 5 goals 12, 42 to 18, 10, 118. So they lost by 76 points. They did kick terribly in front of goals, 5 goals 12. But overall, like, Sydney absolutely dominated them. But it was after that, it was pretty much the next week or within a couple weeks of that Hawthorn really started to hit their straps. They beat the Doggies. They started beating... Actually, I think they did beat the Doggies the next week at Marvel and just got on a run. They played a few games down in Tassie. They kept winning. They just kept winning. They kept beating really good teams and made it all the way to the finals. Whereas Sydney, their train kept running all the way through to like round 15, 16 before it kind of fell apart a little bit at times. Looking back at this game last year, it was pretty much over from quarter time onwards. Sydney kicked a few just before quarter time, and then from that point, it was a domination. I remember watching this game. There weren't too many times when you're thinking Hawthorn were a real chance. Sydney players, they all played well, to be honest. Heaney had 21 and 3 goals. Blakey was good. Goulden was good. He's not going to be playing this time. Warner was good. Florent played probably his best game of the year off the half-back line for Hawthorn. Newcombe was good and Dylan Moore were good. Outside of them, there wasn't a great lot of other things to write home about. It's hard to know, to look too much into stats at the moment because things change a lot over season. So we're not having, like, once games have started to being played, we'll start looking at trends and stuff like that in stats. But for the current season, last year, though, I mean, the inside 50 count wasn't too bad for Hawthorn. They were only -3, but they did have 60 less disposals. They won the clearance game, which is interesting because they weren't dominant at clearances early last year, but they certainly turned that around. And so far in the pre-season, they've been really good in that clearance game. So I'm putting it out there. You're going to see Hawthorn probably win the clearances in this one, and they'll probably win contested football as well. It's just going to be a matter of whether they can look after that ball well enough, not turn it over, and stop Sydney from having uncontested football, because that's where Sydney really did look good last year, was when they were able to just control the football. Whether that was going fast or slow, they were able to get a lot of uncontested footy. They could take it down the guts fast and not be touched by anyone, or when they needed to, they could slow it right back and find the right options. So that's the one thing that Hawthorn can't let happen in this game. They need to be able to bring that pressure for the full 4 quarters. Otherwise, they're going to find it hard to win. A point on this, Sydney had 60 extra disposals last year and also had 22 more tackles. So Hawthorn had less of the ball but still couldn't tackle Sydney, and that's just a sign that Sydney had the better pressure on the day and Hawthorn just weren't able to force Sydney into making mistakes, basically, is the general gist of those numbers. So that was the only time they met last year. The year before, in 2023, they met at the SCG, and once again, pretty similar. Was an absolute flogging in the way of Sydney. It was round 2, so it was right at the start of the season. Sydney won at 17-16 to 4-13. So both the last 2 matches, Hawthorn had kicked really poorly against Sydney, but they lost this one by 81 after losing the next one by 76. So haven't had a great record against Sydney over the last couple of years. That's pretty much that game. Hawthorn, granted, in 2023 weren't great. They only won 7 games, I think. But yeah, it wasn't a great result there. And then round 6, 2022 was the time before they met. That was down in Tassie, and the Swans won that one by 41 points. 16-13, 109 to 10-8, 68. Hawthorn were leading that one at three-quarter time and ended up losing by 41 points. Sydney kicked 9 goals 2 in the final quarter that day, which is crazy. They kicked 9 goals 2 after they over doubled their three-quarter time score, which is crazy. But that's a couple of years ago now, so I don't think that has too much effect on the football world or on this match. If you look at it, though, the last 3 times, Sydney have gone 109, 118, 118, so they score pretty freely against Hawthorn, or they have at least over the last few matchups. And Hawthorn, meanwhile, have gone 68, 37, 42, so a lot lower scoring. However, 2 of those games they did kick really poorly, 4-13 and 5-12, so they're always having about 17 to 18 shots a match. If they can obviously kick a bit straighter, then they get that around 70 score. But they're going to find it hard to stop this Sydney team based on what we've seen in the previous matchups between them. I think that will do for the Sydney Hawthorn match. We'll give my tips shortly. Once we've looked at the other game, we'll do my tips for the matches. But final thoughts. It's going to be a cracker. I think we'll see Hawthorn do really well out of the middle and in contested footy. And if they can bring that pressure, Sydney will find it hard to break the Hawthorn defence apart. The other game this weekend is Sunday afternoon at 3:20 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. It's GWS Collingwood. These two teams started last season against each other at NG Stadium in New South Wales. And it was a good game, in all honesty. GWS came away with the chocolates by about 20, 30 points, something like around there. I mean, I've got it up. Hang on, let me just check. Yeah, 32 points they ended up winning by. But it should have been probably closer, in all honesty. GWS kicked really straight. They kicked 18-6, and Collingwood kicked 11-16. So Collingwood kicked themselves out of it. Meanwhile, GWS just weren't missing, and got the win in opening round last year. That was the only time they met last season. So a good win that day for GWS. You go back to 2023, they met a couple times. The first time they met that year was a Collingwood home game, and Collingwood won it by 65 points. If you think back to 2023, that was the year Collingwood won the premiership, and they met in round 9. And at that point, Collingwood were absolutely flying, and GWS looked like their season was falling apart. Collingwood absolutely dismantled them that day. Granted, GWS did kick pretty poorly, which is a pretty common thing now in AFL, that teams that are losing are kicking poorly. It's, I think, personally, the number one thing that teams need to focus on at the moment is kicking straight, because so many teams are so close to each other in like levels and skills and game plans and stuff, that just kicking poorly in front of goal will affect games, and multiple games. And when it comes down to like percentage or one match at the end of the season, kicking straight is the number one factor that affects that. And then they met again in the prelim final that year, which was an absolute cracker. GWS got away by a couple goals early. Collingwood fought back, took the lead, won it by a point to go into the grand final, and then obviously they went on and won the premiership. So a bit of a rivalry building up, I guess, between these two teams. In GWS's short career in the AFL, they have had 2 preliminary finals against Collingwood. The first time they won by less than a kick at the MCG. The second time they lost by a point at the MCG again. A bit of a rivalry building, I guess. Second year in a row they're starting their season against each other. It's hard to know exactly what we're going to expect, I guess, from these two teams in terms of who's going to be playing and whatnot from this one. Injuries for both teams, we'll start with, I guess, is a good way. For Collingwood, there's going to be no Cox, which would he be playing anyway? I kind of doubt it. Geordie DeGoey, Dan Houston, obviously the new player from their new recruit from Port Adelaide, two-time All-Australian, won't be playing this week. He's suspended still, so he's not going to be out there. Tom Mitchell's still got a while until he's back. Outside of that, they're more fringe players that are missing. Meanwhile, for GWS, there's a couple big ones that have just been announced this week. In Jesse Hogan, who's going to be out until after their bye, I believe. He's broken his thumb in a toilet door. And the other one that's just been announced was Stringer. He's going to be missing a couple weeks as well. Maybe coming back after the bye as well. So that's a couple big forwards for them out for this first game. You chuck in the fact that Tom Green, arguably their best midfielder, is out for 1 to 2 weeks. And it's looking like they're in a little bit of strife in terms of... It's lucky that they've got a very deep team because they've also got suspensions hanging over. Riccardi's not back till round 3. Harvey Thomas is not back until round 3. Then Joe Fonte's not back till round 3. And Fahy is also round 5. A couple of them aren't going to be playing. Ryan Angwin's out for 5 weeks with an ankle. They're not the team that's most hit by injuries at the moment, but they're certainly up there. So you got to think they're going to have their work cut out for them in this early season. No Stringer, no Riccardi, no Hogan, no Tom Green. So that's 4 players that probably are guaranteed to be in their best 22 this year. Certainly 3 of them are. And 3 of those 4 are forward line players. So it's going to be interesting to see how their forward line copes, I guess, early season. I don't think they made too many structural changes or game plan changes that are hugely noticeable yet through the pre-season. Obviously, we'll see a bit more come Sunday and know a bit more about them. But until they get those players back, you're not going to fully know, because last year they relied heavily on Jesse Hogan's ability to win one-on-one down forward. They were quite happy whenever in trouble to kick it long to him one-on-one, because about 50% of the time he's winning it, and then only like 10% of the time is he losing it. Like, it's either a win or a neutral pretty much every time when you kick it to Jesse Hogan. And they're not going to have that option for the first 3 weeks or so. So that will be a concern for them. Tom Green obviously is a really good midfielder as well, so getting the ball out of the midfield will also be a slight issue for them. If you go back to this game last year, it was a game that they were really efficient when they went forward. They had 7 less inside 50s, they had a lot less shots, but they just were making things work when they went forward. Tom Green was huge that day, so that's going to be a big loss for them. But Callum Brown kicked 5, he was a game changer. Jesse Hogan kicked 4, so he also went really well against Collingwood. So it's going to be interesting to see how this GWS forward line specifically, but whole team, manages these early season injuries and suspensions and gets through to that round 3 or 4 when they start getting these gun players back. Obviously, Stringer hasn't played a game for GWS yet. This is his first season there, coming across from Essendon, but they still would have been planning around him most of the pre-season. Meanwhile, for Collingwood, they have made a few little changes. Obviously, Houston's come into the team. He won't be playing this one, but that's obviously a factor in what they've done this pre-season, is having his ability off the half-back line. They've also moved Josh Dacos from a wing to the half-back flank, which I would imagine is going to continue throughout most of the early season at least. And he looks pretty good back there. He's someone that you want the ball in his hands, so it kind of is a no-brainer role for him. I think we'll still see him push up into the centre midfield at times this year, and certainly maybe later in the season, depending on injuries and whatnot. They obviously also brought in two other players, Perryman from GWS, obviously playing against his old team here in his first game for Collingwood. He looks like he's playing midfield time now. Obviously, last year he spent most of it as a halfback flankman, whereas this year he's moved into or at least in the pre-season, has been inside mid as that defensive midfielder, which is probably something Collingwood missed a lot last season, was that inside mid, defensive mid. After Tom Mitchell got injured, they pretty much didn't have anyone for that role. They had Nick Dacos kind of take over the contested and clearance game from Tom Mitchell, but they didn't have someone that's in there tackling hard and locking down players, whereas perhaps now they do have that with with Perryman, at least certainly first start of the season. And then obviously also brought in Tim Membry up forward, which just adds an extra tall for them, which looked really good in their pracky game against Richmond. Granted, Richmond aren't much this year, so you can't read too much into it, but their forward line did look pretty solid in that hit out, because I mean everyone knows they've got some good smalls around them as well in Bobby Hill, Jamie Elliott, Lockie Schultz. So it's a forward line that potentially, if it gets going, could be something to watch this year. They no stars, nobody's there going to kick 50 goals in a season, I don't think. But if they can get 4 of those up above 35, 40 goals a season, that would be huge for them. I think that's what this Collingwood forward line is going to be about in 2025, is about sharing the load and, all kicking you 1 or 2 goals a game and making the season really well, doing well throughout the whole season and consistency. So that is that game, I guess. I don't think I have too much else to say about it. It should be a cracker based on what we've seen these two teams produce previously. So hopefully we get that again. We'll jump into my tips for these two games. So I've gone Sydney over Hawthorn. I'm not confident in either of these two results, to be honest. I've gone Sydney due to it's in Sydney. Their pre-season's been pretty good outside of the fact that they have lost Errol Goulden. I think their forward line looks slightly better this year than it did last year, or at least in the pracky games it has. Things are going well for them. Hawthorn are pretty fit. I don't have many things telling me they won't do well in this game, so I expect it to be a cracker. As I kind of said in the preview, I really feel like it's just going to come down to that pressure game, really. Whether Hawthorn can force Sydney into making mistakes, because Hawthorn are probably going to get their hands on the ball first a lot. But Sydney, will have that pressure. Rowbottom's going to be tackling hard. That their defence is working hard all the time. So they're going to be forcing Hawthorn into mistakes at times. It's just a matter of whether Hawthorn can make Sydney make the same mistakes going back the other way. And then the GWS Collingwood game, I've gone Collingwood mainly because GWS are missing so many people. So many good players are just not out there. I know Collingwood are missing Houston, but I just think Tom Green, Stringer, and Jesse Hogan are three big outs. There's no doubt about it. So I've gone Collingwood, but as I said, I'm not confident with either of these two picks. But that's the way I'm seeing it at the moment. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Who's going to win the two games this weekend? And make sure, if you haven't already, jump on the whatever tipping website you use right now and put in your tips, because you don't want to forget them. Moving on now, these are my power rankings for 2025 to start the season. I'm going to try my best to do power rankings at the end of every week, or just before the games kick off each round. So end the second podcast of each week on with the power rankings Last year I started the season and kind of drifted away from them because it was getting hard to try and work out what I was doing. But I'm going to be better with it this year. We're starting with Brisbane on top. They're the reigning premiers. They have to be on top. Just a little side note as well as I go through this. This is not my tips for the season. This is not where I have them finishing. If you want to see where I have every team finishing, go back, check episode 9 of the podcast. 2025, episode 9. It's all my season predictions in there, in that video. Also, social medias, Instagram, Twitter, wherever else I am, TikTok. I post a lot of these predictions as well on there, so go check them out as well. All Aussie rules everywhere. Geelong, I think their preseason hasn't been spectacular, but I feel like I was more confident in them at the end of last season than I was Sydney, so I'll put them above Sydney. Sydney 3, they're looking good in the preseason. There's no reason not to have a bit of confidence in them. Whether they bounce back after a tough grand final like thrashing last year, it's not going to be easy because not many teams bounce back after getting thrashed in the grand final too well. Port Adelaide, I can see them being a team that drop, but at the moment there's no reason to believe that they will. Hawthorn obviously finished last season fantastically well. Arguably could be in that top 4. GWS in 6, obviously dropped. They finished last season poorly. Their pre-season has been quite bad. They got thrashed by Sydney in a match sim game and then got thrashed by Carlton in a bracky game. So their pre-season hasn't been spectacular. As we said, they've got some injuries. So they're in 6. Bulldogs 7. They've obviously played finals last year, didn't do great in it. Collingwood I've got in 8, even though they finished 9th last season. They finished the season better than Carlton last year, there's no doubt about that. They went 4-1 in their last 5. Whereas Carlton, who I've got in 9th, went like 1-4, I think, in the last 5. So they did the exact opposite. Gold Coast I've put in 10, which is probably slightly higher than they should be. But they finished last year pretty strong. Not great, but okay. Whereas Fremantle finished last year absolutely horrible, losing their last 4 games. But I probably do have more faith in Fremantle's 2025 than I do Gold Coast. Essendon Bombers in 12th. Their pre-season's been good. They're playing some exciting footy, and I look forward to seeing what we can do from them in the next couple of weeks. Obviously, they're not playing this weekend anymore. St Kilda in 13th. Finished last season pretty strong, but we need to see something from them early season. Melbourne are a team that I still think could be a top 4 team in every sense. They've got some really talented players. If Clayton Oliver's back to his best, Petrarca out there, Maxi Gawn's the best ruckman in the league, arguably. So I can see them a team that rises pretty quickly. Adelaide is another interesting one. A lot of people, especially their fans, have high hopes for the Crows this year. And to be honest, that's understandable. They should be a team that's on the rise. They've recruited pretty well in the off-season. Their best 22 looks really good. But I had faith in them last year and they let me down. So I'm not fully convinced, but they are another team I could see rising. West Coast and North Melbourne. I went West Coast above North Melbourne, but in all honesty, it could go either way. North Melbourne probably have looked better in the off-season. West Coast probably have more injuries than North Melbourne. In all honesty, those two teams are pretty even at the moment and will both stay pretty close to the bottom of the ladder, I think. And then Richmond, I don't see them getting out of 18th this year. I don't know at the moment if they're going to win a game. I'm sure they will at some point, but which one that is, I could not tell you. So, they're starting in 18th, and I do not see them getting out of 18th spot on my power rankings this season. But strange things happen in football, so let's not completely write it off, I guess. That's everything for the podcast. Episode 11, opening round is here. Get excited. Make sure you follow my socials. I'm going to be tweeting throughout most games. I'm going to try and be better with it, more consistent with it. Same with Instagram. We'll be posting regular stuff every week on there. If you are not on the YouTube right now, go check it out. I've done season previews for every single club in the AFL. The last one came out yesterday, which was the Bulldogs, but every other team as well is also up there, so go check them out, give them a like, hit that subscribe button, and as I said at the start, if you're watching this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, give it a review, give it a like, give it a follow, all of those things. I appreciate you if you've stuck it out this episode. We're going bigger and better this year. We're going to have plenty of content coming your way. The podcast is only going to get better. I appreciate you. We'll be back on Monday with episode 12. We'll be reviewing the 2 games that happened this weekend, and I might have to come up with some other ideas of what else we're going to talk about. But appreciate you. We'll be back Monday. This is All Aussie Rules, and we'll see you then.